Welcome to the Chief's Catalyst podcast, designed to provide short, insightful, and informative episodes for the dynamic public safety leaders of today. The Chief's Catalyst is for those who are looking for ways to streamline their departmental operations and increase efficiency and effectiveness through people, strategies, and technology. If you like what you hear or want to discuss a topic further, send us an email at catalystpodcast@proton.me. That's CATALYST podcast@proton.me. Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us on a special episode of the Chief's Catalyst podcast. Today, I'm joined by another chief local to the DFW Metroplex, Chief Chris Cook with the White Settlement Police Department. Chief, how are we today?
Doing great. I appreciate the invite. I think these are important topics.
I've had the pleasure to meet you in person at least once before, but I've seen you on the internet for a while, and I know that you've done some phenomenal work with strategic communications, especially with your role as a PIO and as a police chief. And so I'm excited for strategic communications to be our topic today.
All right. Sounds good. Let's get at it.
With that, I want to share with our audience a little bit of your background. I know that you started out a while back as a police officer, but you've got some pretty phenomenal credentials here between LEMIT, IACP as being a committee member. You've been a police chief and a deputy chief for the Arlington Police Department. You've been with the Major Chiefs Association, the general chair for PIO section of IACP, from 2015 to 2018. Is there any notable role in your career that as you promoted through the ranks, you're like, this was my favorite role out of all of them?
Yeah, when you join the policing profession, most people will say, hey, I'm going to join to make a positive difference. That was me as well. I just hit 30 years last month. It's kind of crazy when you look back over the career. It's like you blink and wow, 30 years are gone by. One of the things that was interesting in my background in 2011, the police chief at the time was Theron Bowman in Arlington. He was going to make a decision to disband one of our units, and that I happened to be the sergeant over that unit, not because we did anything wrong. It was just times were changing. It was a drug interdiction unit. And I remember him calling me and explaining his decision, which was good. I appreciate that from him. And then he said, hey, you're going to go to the media office. And I was like, what? And so, but when I look back on my career, it really catapulted me in a lot of different areas. And certainly probably a lot of my successes are related from 2011 on. And one of the most memorable moments was when I was elected as president of the National Information Officers Association right before COVID, because that, you talk about there's like thousands of communicators across a wide array of agencies from coast to coast. And it's really phenomenal the work that people are doing, because so many law enforcement executives that I've met over the years, a lot of people feel like they don't have to talk to the media or nothing's ever going to happen because they're in a small town. And that's really the furthest from the truth. And so that's been very rewarding, being able to get in front of them, have candid conversations, and hopefully, we all learn together. I am by far not the best PIO in the world, far from it. I've made a lot of failures, but as you know, we learn from our failures, and I love to share failure points so that somebody else doesn't have to fall into the traps that I fell into.
Absolutely. Yeah. I look back on my career. I started out wanting to be a police officer and end up at the feds. And then as I learned about crime and intelligence analysis, I was like, forget that. This is where I want to be. But there's definitely been a lot of growth and good pains and bad pains along the way. So let's jump right into our discussion today on strategic communications. So our working definition is targeted, specific messaging that has purpose and meaning to help influence people towards achieving a vision and goals. So not just talking to talk, not just sending out emails or announcements or posts just to post and create content, but that they have meaning towards your vision and goals as a leader. And so our first question is, how can leaders effectively communicate their vision and strategy to ensure that it resonates with every level of an organization or their organization?
Yeah, great question. Certainly want to tip my hat to a good friend of mine, Steve Dye. Met Steve when he was the police chief in Grand Prairie. Now he's over in Allen. And when I first got into the role, I remember having lunch with Steve at the Grand Prairie Airport, a little restaurant over there. He likes to take people. And he said, Chris, every time you communicate, you need to have a reason. Don't just put something on social media just because, you feel like something needs to go up. Don't just send out a communication to your workforce because you feel like, hey, once a week we need to send something out. Everything needs
You
to
hadn't
be,
posted today.
yeah, right. The post of the week, whatever it ends up being. And Steve was really on to something way back then. And what I loved about that is certainly when you can determine, okay, everything we do needs to align with our mission, vision, and values. And if you feel like that your mission, vision, and values are stale, then change them and work with the entire workforce. Get buy-in from every level. That's what we did. After I met with Steve, I went to my boss at the time, Will Johnson, great friend, did a lot of wonderful things for my career. And I said, hey, would you be open to really asking our employees, what is the vision and values and mission? Let's see how many of them even know it. And what was ironic is most people, unless they were in a promotional process, they really could not, spell out what that was. And so if we can't even expect our employees to know what our values statements are, then how can we expect the community to rally? And so that really telegraphed to me that as a leader, we've got to do everything we can, and that's being intentional, which relates to the question that every time that I send something out or I'm in a briefing, it could be in-person comms, it could be on our digital dashboards. We use a lot of different technologies where I'm at now to communicate. I'm okay with someone saying we're over communicating. What I want to take off the table is that someone in the organization, whether they're in dispatch, they're in records, they're a patrol officer on midnight shift, somebody saying, I didn't know what's going on. And so we pride ourselves on being able to put a lot of information out there. It's certainly there's a balancing act and kind of an art to it. But at the end of the day, everything that we do has a purpose, it has meaning, it's intentional. I always like to say, hope is the absence of having a plan. Many chiefs, and me included, we always hope to get by and we hope that something controversial won't end up on the 5 o'clock news, but that is not being strategic. Being strategic, like you state, is really communicating effectively that reinforces those organizational values that we all pride ourselves upon.
That's a great point too about if you can't talk about your organizational values or your people don't know what they are, maybe you need to change them because they're truly not the values. They're just things we put up on the wall, but maybe they're not meaningful. So that's
Yeah,
that's a really
and if I
important
could
note for I
add,
think.
yeah, if I could add to that too, one of the exercises we did in Arlington, we did the same thing when I got to White Settlement. We changed it. We formed a committee, and I know like everybody kind of shrugs their shoulders at committees, but we brought in committee members all over the organization, civilian, non-sworn, and we refer to them as professional staff team members, and our sworn officers, every rank. And they came up in Arlington with service before self, honor above all. And if you really think about that, that's something, number one, you can easily recall. Number two, it really embodies the work that law enforcement provides, whether I'm a records clerk or again I'm on the other end of that 911 call or I'm dispatching an officer or I'm going to the incident. If we really sell to that premise of service before self, honor above all, we're going to do our very best. And we did the same thing when I got to White Settlement. Our vision statement was super long, it was like 5 sentences, nobody knew it. And now it's excellence in everything we do. It is short, sweet, to the point. It really, again, embodies what I expect every level of the organization, no matter what work group you're assigned to. If you subscribe to providing excellence to the community, our community and our department will be better because of it.
That's great. So, what are some of the common pitfalls that you've seen as a police leader, but as a leader in general, when communicating direction, and how can we do well to avoid them?
One of the first things I learned, and this was through a failure point in Arlington, when you have an employee that either engages in misconduct or you have employees, God forbid, they're seriously injured in a call, No one ever likes to think about a line of duty death occurring in your agency, but it's a dangerous world, and we provide a level of service where we are constantly going into harm's way. And the failure point was not getting in front of those internally. We did a great job as far as getting the messaging out to the local media and our community. But what I learned really quickly is the most important component of all that's our employees. They should get it first. And so, again, under the leadership of Will Johnson, who's now the police chief at BNSF Railway Police, we really committed to the employees are going to get information first and foremost. Whether that's an MDC computer message, because it was a big agency, or it's an email. And, we don't like to rely on email a lot. That's another pitfall we could go into and discuss as well, because email, it's really hard to be personal. Sometimes people can read tone in emails. But even in white settlement, we use a mobile app. There's several companies out there, and I will push out, we call them Chiefs messages. If something big's going on, I'll give you an example. Just last night, we had an incident, a suicide by cop, where this individual wanted us to kill him. Officers got on scene. They had to call in additional jurisdictions. Thankfully, no one was hurt. They were able to take this man into custody. But I was really so proud of really the radio that I was listening to. Dispatch did a great job. Certainly, there's always things we can debrief on and do better. But I was able to instantly give feedback to the workforce, to everybody that was off. Will see that, hey, this call came out, they did a great job. And I just call those little shout outs. And so those are good things to do. The pitfall is this: not giving, good, proactive, positive feedback when it's warranted. A lot of times we do a not the best job in like accommodations. I can remember at Arlington, sometimes accommodation may take 6 months to get. And, you start giving it to the employee and they're like, I barely even remember the call. And so that's one of the pitfalls and failure points I think that all of us can learn from. And so if you can whether that's a mobile app, whether that's in person, if you're a super small agency, giving a pat on the back and going to their shift briefing and talking about the good things that they did, I think that you will absolutely see a lot of organizational culture turn that needle in the positive direction.
That kind of leads us into another question that was down here on our list. But what role this plays in consistent internal communication for fostering that employee engagement and alignment with those goals?
One of the things that you have to do, whether you're a large, medium, or small agency, it's irrelevant. You have to get team players out there that are going to let you know what's going on. Even in White Settlement, we have 58 employees. We're small, but even at that size, I do not know what's going on all the time. There's just no way. You're going to always have blind spots as a leader. And so, one of the ways that I have really approached that in the small department is I have a strategic communications team, and I don't have the budget or money to have a full-time team like we had in Arlington or like Fort Worth or like Dallas has. But what I've done is I've got two detectives. Their primary role is to be a detective, but their ancillary role is to represent our agency as a strategic communications team. We have two dispatchers and we have two patrol officers, and I intentionally set it up like that. So there's a total of six because, quite frankly, having someone in patrol, dispatch, and investigations, they're able to really keep the pulse on the department. They're able to say, hey, chief, you may not be aware of this. Patrol did a really good job on this arrest. Or, hey, chief, you may be aware of this call that came in. We dispatched officers, to a car fire, and we heard the radio traffic. They pulled someone out. These are things that may not always rise to my level. We hope they do. We hope that, the chain of command, eventually that notification will get to us. But if you have a team members that can do that, and whether, again, if you're in a big agency, great, make sure your full-time communications officials are briefing you so that you can make sure you're pushing that message out. And not every message that you put out internally with your workforce doesn't always translate. It's going to work externally on social media or with the news media. There are many cases that we highlight internally. I would say a lot more than we ever put on Facebook or Instagram or X, Twitter, or whatever, right? Because at the end of the day, we sometimes will keep some of those messages in-house. But I think that as we move forward as leaders, if we can foster an environment where it's okay for employees to take a photo. I get it. We have to comply with the retention laws. And so, what I tell our employees, if you're on midnight shift, you see an officer doing a great thing and the scene is stabilized and you get a photo, once you put that in our organizational mobile app and send it to our comms team, you can now delete that off your personal device and you have complied with the retention laws. I also think that we need to allow our sergeants, again, it's easier in a small department, but I let my supervisors send me stuff directly. They'll text me because, from their shift perspective, they like getting shout outs for their teammates, right? If only one shift, we have 4 shifts, we have A, B, C, and D, we're on 12-hour shifts. If only one shift's getting all the shout outs, it doesn't mean that the other 3 shifts aren't working. It just means we're at the wrong place, the wrong time in the communications realm to be able to capitalize on what those other shifts are doing, to be able to celebrate their great work. Because I'm a firm believer there is excellent work occurring all the time. As leaders, though, we just need some help from time to time in getting that information to our hands so that we can internalize and share that with the workforce.
Absolutely. I love that. Like giving good feedback when warranted too. That just helps people be encouraged that they're on the right track, they're doing the right thing. And we just rolled out a new feedback board internally at the PD where the public surveys and then can post those like gratitude notes and stuff like that. And we had some skepticism for sure at first. And so when we did our onboarding with it and our training, I went around the room in the shift briefings and said, okay, how many of you have gotten a written documented complaint from the public? And most everybody's hand went up at some point or another, whether it was warranted, whether it went through to something, or whether it just went to a supervisor and they signed off on it. And I said, okay, now same show of hands, how many of you have gotten a written commendation from the public? It was like one person, I think, out of all 4 shifts had gotten a written commendation from the public on something they had done well. And generally it's during like a CPR save or some major call for service. It's not in those day-to-days. And so what we talked about was having that holistic perspective of an officer so that when something bad does happen or they do have some type of complaint, the chief has that good feedback to rely on as well. But it's encouraging for those officers too to know that, hey, I'm on the right track and I am doing the right thing the majority of the time.
I think the key right there is you went face to face in briefings because I was going to say it is super important. And when you start talking about, we all fall into the trap, even as chiefs, sometimes where we can get cynicism can raise its ugly head, right? Or skepticism. City manager or our, council maybe rolls out an initiative and you're playing, catch up, which, as a chief, we need to support those initiatives that are council priorities that come out or from the city manager's office. And so it's the same thing with our cops. Something comes down from the chief's office, right? And there's a little bit of skepticism there on how this will impact. But I think that you really are on the right path because nothing can substitute. There's no technology in the world that can substitute good old fashioned face to face, I call it camaraderie briefings because it builds camaraderie, right? It means that everyone's on the team. As a chief, I serve alongside you. Yes, there's an org chart that has a chief at the top, but at the end of the day, we're all serving alongside one another. And if you're a leader or if you're in a leadership position, you're really serving the lower echelon. And the reason I say that is you're trying to make sure they have the tools and the technologies and the awareness and the information to do their job. And part of that is going and sitting with them saying, hey, just checking in on the pulse of the department. What's going on? How can I help you? I'll give you a great example. We're switching to a new electronic ticket writer. And wow, you wouldn't think that would be a lot of discussion, but it has become a lot of discussion because part of it is like, well, are we doing this because you think we need to, make more traffic stops and all this noise, as I call it. In reality, no, we're just trying to get into the 21st century and have electronic tickets to where, that helps our municipal court from a records management perspective. It helps us from a comp stat perspective on looking on where our problem areas are at because we have an old saying in our department, the officer has the discretion on who receives a citation, who receives a verbal warning, who gets a written warning. As a police chief or my leadership team, we're never going to tell an officer how to do their job in that regard. And so, but guess what? It took us going to briefings and talking about it. Hey, this is why it's coming out. Certainly open to feedback. We want to make this as easy as possible, knowing full well anytime you change a technology item, there will be some bumps in the road. But that's some of the ways you can avoid the pitfalls. One of the things I always kind of struggled with, when I worked at Arlington, every once in a while, and I understand the reason we probably did it. We're so big, it's hard to hit all the briefings. A chief is not going to be able to hit 1,000 employees in a week. They just won't be able to. We would send out an email. This is changing. And then that creates this uproar. And then, you've got, each team is upset and you're trying to gauge, okay, well, how big is it? How can we fix this? And it usually boiled down to we still, even in a big agency, would have to go discuss things with employees. I think one of the ways that we do it in White Settlement, again, this credit to Steve Dye, we have a shared leadership team. And what I mean by that is if we're going to change something, we'll bring the team together. We'll talk at it from all angles and we'll get buy-in. And I really like that because then I can say, hey, the shared leadership team also agreed with this potential change. Now, there's a couple things every once in a while as a chief, as you know, if you get a legislative mandate, something's got to change, or if it's a high level officer safety topic, we've got to make a change, then yeah, we're not going to convene the shared leadership team. But you got to be able to stand on your 2 feet and explain, hey, this was an emergency situation. We had to make this immediate change. But those are really rare instances. By and large, if you can get in a room full of people and just have some candid conversations, even if there's a naysayer, that's okay. I welcome the naysayer. I'd rather them, tell me what they're upset about or what their concerns are in front of the group so that I can educationally explain, well, did you look at it from this angle? Because as you know, everybody has a different perspective depending on what chair they're sitting in. And sometimes people don't always see the other things that as leadership teams that we have to wrestle with. Because at the end of the day, we don't sit around just to push things out to upset people. We should have a strategy behind it and a purpose, and there's a reason why we're making these changes.
Absolutely. So we've touched on a little bit. And I think you brought up two ways that you garner these, but how important is it to create those feedback mechanisms in internal communications? And what strategies have you seen work really well to get that honest input back?
Yeah, so a couple things. Number one, I have skip level meetings. What that essentially means is as a chief, I will meet with all of our sergeants. So we're skipping the lieutenant rank and the assistant chief rank. We have one assistant chief and two lieutenants. That was new for White Settlement. That's something we did in Arlington. It worked well. And the reason you have a skip level meeting is sometimes as a chief, you're not going to get direct feedback all the time from your assistant chief or your lieutenants, not because they're not trying to give you the feedback, but there just could be some information silos there. There could be some situations where they don't have access to all the information. So I do a skip level meeting with our sergeants, and then I meet with our corporals. Same thing, skip level meeting where I'm skipping the sergeant rank. And it's funny, the corporals, they'll bring up issues in their meeting, but it's really the same issues the sergeants are bringing up. And so that is a feedback loop. We do that quarterly. I also meet with our labor group. We have a police officer association like many agencies, and we meet quarterly as well. And I think that's important because sometimes an association may have a different take or they may have some things that have been brought up by their members that I have no visibility on at all. And a lot of times we can almost correct, if there's an allegation of deficiency in our organization, I can almost immediately fix those one-offs. And so I also use that for my budget prep because quite frankly, it's always good to have the Police Officer Association supporting our budget as we move forward, because that's one of the things my boss always asks me if we're trying to go a new programmatic route or new equipment route, how does the association feel? And so I want to already have that in my back pocket that we've met, we've discussed, and all that. Another feedback loop that we do, I hit a lot of briefings. I wear my uniform every day. I think as a leader, we need to be in uniform. Especially the smaller agency you are, the more important this is, right? And that way I'm getting almost feedback any kind of interaction that I go to, any incident that I'm backing somebody on. And it's not that people are moaning or complaining. It's just, hey, how's your family doing? How's everything you're doing? How did you get to go to that training class that you put in for? How was that? It's just, I guess where I'm going with all this is police one, They do an annual survey, and that's what our cops read, by the way. And there's three. They call it the three C's. And usually the survey goes like this: how can your department improve? And it's a nationwide survey. And the three C's are that my department could be more caring. They could act like they care about me, and they're usually poking fingers at the executive team and the leader. The second thing, the second C, so you have caring, is the second C is consistency. There's a lot of concerns about, are we consistent in the way that we let people bid for their shifts, or the way that we promote people, or the way that we give somebody a specialized duty assignment. So consistent, or the way that we hold somebody accountable. That's a big one. There's always a perception that, well, this person on this shift, they didn't get hammered as hard as the person on this other shift, right? So you have caring, you have consistency, and then the third one is communication, which is what we're talking about on this podcast. And quite frankly, most of the time, the survey claims police employees feel like they don't know what's going on, that there's no communication from the chief's office down. And so that's one of the reasons I have these skip level meetings. That's one of the reasons that we do the, quarterly meetings with the association. That's why I'm in briefings a lot. And then there's two more things real fast. We started something new last year. This is brand new. We did not do this in Arlington, but I saw some chiefs around Texas doing this, and they said they've had good feedback. We do a leadership retreat now where we get out of White Settlement. Matter of fact, Arlington let us host it in their city. And we were able to get all of our supervisors, civilian supervisors, sworn supervisors, in a room with command staff. And we went over our 3-year strategic plan, where we're at, what do we need to tweak. We did the SWOT analysis, all the typical things that you would expect to come out of a leadership retreat. Fantastic. I thought it was excellent. Matter of fact, it was so well received. We did 2 days. I'd like to move that to like a 3-day retreat this year. And then the last thing that we started is a book club. And quite frankly, you think about, do people read books? Some people do, some people don't. But we picked books that were relevant and important. And it's funny, when you're talking about a book, you get feedback on other areas over the organization because, for example, we did Good to Great Policing, right? Which was Chuck Wexler and the Perf group. We also did Jim Collins' Good to Great, right? From it's corporate business book, but there's a lot of takeaway for law enforcement. We're doing Crucial Conversations right now. Last year, we did civility. And why did we pick civility? Because quite frankly, there's a lot of incivility in the community at times, and there's certainly some incivility internally with employees. And so all of that I was able to get good feedback on how we improve ourselves. So those are just some of the ways that we elicit feedback. I don't have a random box. I don't usually take random complaints. Sometimes somebody will slide something under my door, but if I don't have any way of following up, is that just somebody that's disgruntled, upset? It's really hard to work on those levels. But at the end of the day, if we're at the right place, right time as a leader, and if our leadership teams are doing what they need to be doing and they're engaged with their employees, then quite frankly, I think that we're on to a good horizon as far as the holistic approach looking at the entire organization.
Absolutely. That's such a good way too to build up your people through those leadership retreats and through book club. I know some people roll their eyes and they go, "Oh, great. Now we all got to go read this book or do this thing." But I think there's value that comes from those discussions because, I mean, if we know one thing, it's that we don't know everything. And the only way we're ever going to improve on that is if we go learn from other people. How do we do that? We read, we listen, we talk, we do those things. So that's one of the things I try to do every day is read something, write something, talk about something with somebody else to communicate that vision. But that's such a great way to invest in your leaders on both the sworn and the professional staff side. Because like you said, they all bring such great feedback to the table and help discuss some of those things. It changes everybody's perspective and it gets everybody towards that same goal and
Yeah, and
vision.
if you
So
throw that on
with
a
that,
promotional exam, you're going to really get a lot of buy-in. If you tell them, "Hey, this book could be on your promotional exam next year," and we've started doing that as well. So
that's great. I like that a lot. I always go back and forth with the folks at ILEA because I'll come back, be frustrated one day, and I'm like, I call them, like, man, we just did this big thing. We all read it. Somebody went to the supervisor's course and they came back and they're doing the same things they did before. Did they not learn anything? They're like, well, yeah, they learned something, but Like, how do I make them practice it? And they go, well, you're going to have to work on that, right? You can't just snap your fingers and say, all right, practice everything you learn. So are there any tools or platforms that you found effective for facilitating internal communications in real time? I know for your agency, you brought up the use of an app.
Yeah, so two things from a technology side. I'm again not a big email fan. Maybe I just got burned out on emails in Arlington a little bit. We overused email, unfortunately. So when I got to White Settlement, I'll give a shout out to Carissa Katakura. She used to be at Northwestern Hills. She's now with the city of Roanoke. She used a digital dashboard called First Arriving. Actually started for the fire service, but there was a lot of crossover with police departments. And so in every major room in my police department, we have a digital dashboard. And it's really easy to make changes to. It's basically Google Slides is how you operate it. It's like a Chrome computer. And so, whether you work in dispatch, you're in the admin suite, you're in criminal investigations, you're in patrol, there's these giant monitors and it rotates slides every 10 seconds. Think of it like a rotating PowerPoint. And what's really nice about that, we can also send instant messages like called like a ticker at the bottom if there's something major going on. Let's say that, I don't know, annual health enrollment is fixing to expire on Friday. And if the HR director says, hey, you've got 10 employees left that haven't done their annual enrollment, we'll put that down on the ticker to get people's attention. We also do shout outs for birthdays. I think that's important. It's a big win. We do shout outs for work anniversaries. We put all of our departmental events. And so while they're briefing in patrol, this thing is rotating and it takes about 10 minutes to get through all the slides. And then it does it again. It's just constantly on 24/7. And so First Arriving, a great resource. By the way, I get nothing by recommending. I'm just telling you what we're utilizing. The other one, we use Evertel. And that's just a mobile app. Evertel's been around for a long time. I think they just were bought out by Genesis, but the core product has not changed, and it allows us to set up groups. So, like if you work A shift, which is day shift, that sergeant can go in and create a group for A shift patrol. No one else can go in it. It's just for them. The same thing. I have a chief's message I told you about. I get my command notifications from dispatch. So if we have, something that we feel like that needs, the command staff needs notification on, they're able to send that out. So all of this has helped us from an internal comms perspective. Because if you think of it like this, I'll give you an example. We had an officer struck on the freeway recently. Luckily, he was not seriously injured. They basically just took his mirror off. It was a failure to move or slow down. Well, dispatch sends that out, right? Because obviously, as a chief, I want to know that we've had a car hit. Well, that also allows me then to take that message, because not all the cops are on that. It's just command staff and dispatch. I'm able to craft a message internally before rumors start, right? And say, hey, Officer Nathan Perez was conducting a traffic stop, had just returned to his vehicle after a passenger side approach, and a truck that was talking on the phone or fumbling on their phone struck his patrol Tahoe. He's not seriously injured, and all that, right? And so all of that kind of helps. So I rely on Evertel and I rely on the First Arriving digital dashboards from the technology side. As far as good old fashioned face to face briefings, though, nothing can take the place of that. There's a lot of value in chiefs, assistant chiefs, captains, lieutenants, whatever your upper echelon is, making sure they're hitting briefings, not to micromanage the conversation, but simply just to check in. How's everybody going? Invariably somebody may say, hey, chief, what's going on with the budget? What's going on with council? What's going on, with sales tax? We may get, and so, if you're at the right place, right time, you're able to give them the right information. And again, that reduces rumors across the organization.
That's so great. And that kind of brings us to our next point here in talking about some strategies that leaders should use to communicate during times of organizational change or crisis. And I know often we think about crisis being that external crisis, right? Like somebody getting hit on the freeway. But you brought up a great point in kind of controlling that internal mis and disinformation as well, to say, nope, this is exactly what happened, before somebody spins off and misinterprets a post on somebody's wife's Facebook. Like, here's exactly what's going on, and here it is straight from the chief. So are there any other strategies that you think leaders should use to communicate during these times of organizational change or crisis?
Certainly, the type of incident will either speed up or give you time. If you have a officer seriously injured, God forbid, killed in the line of duty, your timeline is going to be very compressed because news travels so fast. And so you're going to want to be able to get the information into the hands of your employees as quickly as possible. And that, you know what, you may have to rely on an email and then follow up with a command page through the app saying, hey, check your email for important information, you know, about what happened. There are other times that can turn into a crisis. I'll give you an example. Let's say that we're going to terminate an employee. You know, certainly the old saying of discipline in private, praise in public reigns true. But one of the things that we do in our organization, if we're going to let somebody go, and thankfully we since I've been chief, we haven't had to do this. But I'm just going to give you an analogy because I get this question a lot from chiefs. How do you communicate discipline in the organization? Well, first of all, I think number one, there are varying schools of thought. It also depends on if you're 143 civil service and if you're just an at will employer. But at the end of the day, what one of the things that we've done, if we're going to have a major discipline case and we're ready to take that action, you know, all the ducks are in a row. A lot of times we'll communicate with the association immediately following the meeting with the, you know, impacted employee. And I do that from the perspective not to legislate the case with them. They don't get like the case file. They're not going to get, you know, inside baseball knowledge, if you will. They're going to know though, hey, just FYI, one of your members, this was the allegation, it was sustained, and this is the proposed level of discipline. Because regardless whether you're civil service or not, there is usually some type of appeal procedure, whether that's through civil service or that's through a meet and confer agreement like arbitration or whatever the case may be. And so I have found in Arlington that works well when we would exact high levels of discipline. I'm not talking about letters of counseling, stuff like that, because one of the biggest rumors that always can impact the agency in a negative way is when somebody thinks they know what happened and then they're spreading gossip. And we got to call that out. And I will tell you, I really believe that our first line supervisors have to be they're the, you know, guardians of that. You know, when they hear somebody in briefing talking about that kind of stuff, they have got to shut that down. They need to bring that employee that is talking about that stuff behind closed doors and explain like how damaging that can be, because they're not going to be privy to all the facts. So that's one of the things, you know, I think as a leader that has been helpful when we have, you know, high profile misconduct cases. But on your critical incidents where somebody's injured, you're just going to have to get in front of your employees as quickly as you can. Nobody wants to turn on the news and read about their agency and not have awareness internally first. I think it goes a long way if we can absolutely be in a position to communicate first. I think our employees will respect us for that. Also, we need to be careful about not putting our public information officers in those bad situations where they're the ones communicating something really difficult to the agency. I think it needs to be the leader. And because at the end of the day, everything falls on the shoulders of that leader anyway. And so that's the things I think we need to be on guard against and make sure that, again, right place, right time, right medium on what we choose and how we communicate matters. Always, always have somebody proof. Hopefully, somebody in your leadership team can proof what you plan to send out so that, you know, something's not erroneous or something comes across with some tone. Because obviously, in those times of adversity, we want to come across very professional, caring, compassionate.
Absolutely. So, are there any other strategies that you could recommend to help counter those situations of misinformation or rumors? I know you mentioned bringing those frontline supervisors in as kind of that gatekeeper to say, "Oop, nope, hang on, I heard that. Let's draw it back." We had a situation a couple of months ago rolling out a new technology platform. There was an error that happened, and people quickly spun out with, "Oh, this is what happened," and then it got brought up in a command staff meeting, and a sergeant looked down the table and said, "Hey, this is exactly gospel what happened." I had to turn to
Mm,
him and say, "No, sir, actually, that's factually incorrect because here's what the CAD says, here's what the body cam said, here's what the
yeah.
timestamps on that actually were." And he immediately went, "Oh, I have misheard something," and immediately quick reconciliation and correction of that information. But are there any other strategies that you can recommend to counter that misinformation or rumors effectively?
Yeah, you know, one of the reasons we chose the book last year, Mastering Civility, is to counter stuff like that. Rumors and sometimes misinformation. And I do want to qualify, misinformation is when somebody says something not intentional, but they just have the wrong facts or the wrong perspective. That is common in law enforcement agencies. And then there's a thing called disinformation. And we have some employees, we had some in Arlington. I've had some cases where I'm at now where intentionally there is information that is put out there that's just quite frankly, they know that's not right, but they're going to spread that. And we have to push back on it. One of the ways and strategies that has worked for me, and I don't see, I've got thick skin. I'm not bashful about going to somebody saying, "Hey, I just heard you say that. Where did you hear that? Who gave you that information? Because it's just not correct." "Oh, well, I don't know. I don't remember where I heard it." "Okay, well, that means then it started with you." And I get kind of direct on that. That means you're going to take the fall for this on spreading misinformation in our department, which can cause major organizational cultural issues. That's why we have to push back. And then invariably they'll say, "Oh, well, you know what, Chief, I'll tell you, it came from this person on this shift." And then, you just kind of go down the path and you start talking about, okay, where did you hear it from? And that's been a strategy that's kind of worked well. I don't try to put gossip, rumors, misinformation on our formal communication channels internally. A lot of times, if it's constrained to a particular shift, I'll go meet with the shift, saying, "Hey, look, I'm sorry this information got out. It's not correct. Sorry about the varying perspective." But I think as leaders, we have to be sensitive to that because it can really torpedo us. We can torpedo the great things that we're doing internally. I've seen it, rear its ugly head more than once in my 30 years of career. And when I look back on a lot of it, it was just made up. It was, whether it was intentional or not, unknown, but it sure hurt the organizations where this stuff occurred. And so I do agree, though, our sergeants and in my agency, corporals are also first line supervisors. We spent a considerable amount of time in that Mastering Civility book talking about what I call organizational dissension. And a surefire way to get organizational dissension is to turn a blind eye when people are gossiping and briefing about someone, taking shots about another employee. We as supervisors have to call that behavior out and we have to set the example. The worst thing that can ever happen is to have a first line supervisor, or even worse, a mid-level manager like a lieutenant or an assistant chief that is gossiping or engaging in those rumors because they'll think that it's okay to do because it's basically sanctioned by the chain of command. So yeah, got to push back when you see that in your organization.
That is a great strategy, and it can be difficult to have those candid conversations because something I think is funny with law enforcement is in the law enforcement profession, right? We're to deal with it's our job to deal with difficult situations always. It's very rare that people call us and say, "Hey, we just wanted to talk to the cops and go get a coffee and get donuts together." No, there's something bad that's happened and I'm distraught, I'm frustrated, I'm mad at you. And we're really good at dealing with those things, right? And writing those reports and taking people to jail. But when it comes to some of those internal tough conversations, sometimes people shy away from that. And so I think that's a great way to go direct and head on with that. Now, can you share a time that a communication strategy maybe did not go as planned and maybe what you learned from that experience?
Yeah, so this was more of an external strategy, but it became an internal distraction after it went out. We had an officer that was shot in the head. This is an Arlington case. He survived. It was a miracle because headshots are very difficult. To this day, he is still working and made a miraculous recovery. It was a SWAT call. And the communication failure went like this. I guess a few weeks into this, we had a local business that wanted to donate a bunch of stuff to this officer and his wife and his kids. They have family. And, we did the typical, hey, we're going to go pose with this corporate, vendor and put something out on social media saying, hey, thank you to this business for donating. And where the distraction came in was it really turned the conversation from praying for recovery and healing for the officer to, y'all are taking gratuities. How can you ever hold this business accountable now? They did this intentionally to get favor with the Arlington Police Department. Just a huge distraction. And even internally, employees were mixed. Like, yeah, y'all should never have even, you should have just kept your mouth shut, and never put that out. And so what I learned from that is no good deed goes unpunished. There's really a lot of truth to that. And so when we're putting out communications, whether internal or external, I like to use what I call the ACE principle. You assess the situation or incident. So in this case, it would have been like, okay, they're donating to the family. Are there any city policies we need to consider here as it relates to donations? And then we choose a path or plan. Maybe if we decide, yeah, city policy is going to allow us to accept it, but our path is we're not putting it on social media because we don't want it to be misconstrued or for it to be a distraction, right? And then we execute, the E for execute. So it's assess, choose, a plan, path, E for execute. And then we need to evaluate is the last thing. And so I put in that ACE principle after that case. And it's funny, I just heard from a chief in North Texas about 2 years ago, similar situation. Somebody donated a pizza party to their police department. They posed with a photo, didn't think it was a big deal, gave them a shout out, thank you. Matter of fact, the police department was going to redonate the pizza party to some other group in the community. But it turned into a lot of backlash because of who the company was, a lot of allegations back and forth. And so, again, it became a big distraction, adverse news stories and stuff like that. So, I guess the real learning moment from all of these types of cases is before we put information out externally or internally, got to really think it through and make sure that it's going to be well received. And that from it won't cause our agencies to be in disrepute because someone's able to kind of launch an arrow at us because of what we did.
Absolutely. So I know you've been on here now for a while with me, so thank you so much for your time today. Is there any advice or other bits of information that you would give to a leader in law enforcement looking to improve their strategic communication skills going forward from today?
I think one of the things that I've noticed, and it's probably because I grew up as a PIO, I had the luxury of having a leadership team when I was a sergeant, when I was a lieutenant, even when I was a deputy police chief, that invested in my training, invested in my opportunity to go to conferences and network. There are so many tools. And even if you don't have a full time PIO, that is okay. Again, I told you I've got 6 ancillary duty PIOs. We call them strategic communication advisors. I think that's the kind of new buzzword of the day. And one of the things that I do, even in the small town of White Settlement, I send them to the annual National Information Officers Association conference. I send them to the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the PIO section conference. So that means they went to Florida last year, they went to Boston last year, and Texas Police Chiefs Association, they're about to form a committee for public information officers. Real excited about that. My wife is actually the director of communications for TPCA, working for Director Gene Ellis. And so, she's retired police out of Mansfield and Arlington herself. And so that should allow leaders, if they can't afford to send someone to a conference out of state, there should be some internal opportunities. But invest in your people, invest in their training. Because I know that we're always concerned with emergency driving, and we should be as leaders, right? That's a high risk when we're engaging in vehicle chases, right? We're always concerned about the use and application of force, and we should be, rightly so. Very high risk liability item for departments. But I would argue, based on, again, since 2011, being on the executive team at Arlington, now in White Settlement, if you look around the profession, majority of the time when a police chief loses their job, or let's say they retire, I guess, under duress because it's just their time to go, you can almost look at the situation and it was either to do with some kind of failure point internally on communication, or they did not navigate a controversial situation, incident, misconduct, crisis, whatever you name it, effectively in their community. So, as leaders, we should put communication up there just in the same regard as we look at emergency vehicle operation, in the same regard as we look at use of force, meaning that we should train on it regularly, that we should have professionals to assist us, that we should allow our teams to go to training, to network, That would be my advice. Don't overlook how important communications. And if you're not a good communicator as a leader, and let's face it, not all of us are great communicators. That's not, I'm not saying that that's a paramount skill that you have to have. Then surround yourself with good communicators as well. And if you're a great communicator, hey, that's great. But still surround yourself with a team, because you're going to need some type of succession planning for your agency. It is not a sign of greatness when you retire as a leader and now all of a sudden your department doesn't know how to engage with the media, doesn't know how to engage with the community. You've got to really kind of invest in your team. So that would be my challenge to police chiefs, sheriffs, anybody in a leadership position overseeing a communications team or a communications professional, is take the time, acknowledge their value, put some money and time and energy into them, give them the tools they need, and then turn them loose. Let them do great things, because the danger is always being defined by others. And so if you are forward leaning on internal, external communications, you're going to be leaps and bounds ahead of a lot of peers around the state and, more importantly, around the country. And so take it for what it's worth. Communication, extremely important.
Well, thank you so much, Chief, for sharing that with us. And if you've enjoyed our conversation today with Chief Cook, he does have a book, The Art of Strategic Communication, for police chiefs and police leaders. But I think a great read for anybody looking to improve those strategic communication skills and really build off of what we've kind of started talking about here. But Chief, thank you so much for your time today. Hopefully we'll get out to your department soon and see kind of what's in play there with your technology and that strategic comms around the building. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate the discussion.
In this episode, we dove into the essential principles of strategic communication for law enforcement leaders. Communication isn't just about putting out messages to message. It's about ensuring that every message serves a purpose. That means aligning communication with agency vision and values and being willing to adjust them when necessary. One key takeaway is that employees should always be the first to receive important information. Keeping officers and line-level staff informed fosters trust and prevents rumors from taking hold. Leadership must also prioritize giving constructive feedback and recognizing good work when warranted and actively engaging in two-way communications. In-person attendance at briefings is crucial for leaders at all levels, not just to share updates, but to listen. We talked about skip-level meetings where chiefs can brief sergeants or corporals directly and help bridge some of the gaps that there arise to ensure alignment throughout the ranks. Leadership retreats and book clubs can also provide additional opportunities for professional development and fostering a culture of continuous learning. We also addressed some of the growing challenges of both misinformation and disinformation. Frontline supervisors can be that first line of defense when it comes to countering rumors, and agencies have to take a proactive approach, confronting false narratives directly and training regularly on strategic communications. Once again, strategic communication in law enforcement isn't just about what we say, it's about how and why we say it. It requires consistency, care, and a commitment to keeping officers and the public well informed. By being proactive, transparent, and engaged, law enforcement leaders can build stronger and more resilient agencies. Thanks for tuning into the Chief's Catalyst. If you found this episode valuable, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Let's keep the conversation going and connect with us on LinkedIn. Until next time, stay strategic.